Hi, and welcome to this live reading from Die For Me by Diane Hester, and this is presented by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Chapter 1. She'd known the risks when she left the house. This deep into a New England winter, 3 weeks shy of spring in fact, though it hardly felt like it, the weather was grossly unpredictable. Still, jogging had always been her escape, and right now she needed it more than ever. Lauren pulled up her tracksuit hood against the first stinging needles of icy rain. Just about time to turn back anyway. Trouble was, the road she was on, a winding course through one of the Cape's old housing estates, hadn't looped around as she'd expected, and there was no side streets leading to where she'd left the car. She knew it was off to the left somewhere, so when a path opened up in the woods on that side, she veered to take it. Twisting branches of scrub oak and pine closed overhead, clawing at the menacing sky. Though the roads had been clear, beneath the trees a blanket of snow still covered the ground, clearly scored by multiple tracks. It gave her a trail to follow at least, for which she was grateful. In her fondness for running in unfamiliar places, she sometimes found herself getting lost. The path commenced a gradual descent until the woods bottomed out on a snow-covered field. A row of houses backed up onto the opposite side, the trail she followed leading across and between 2 yards. And there, just visible beyond the gap, stood her car, parked on the side of the road. She stepped out from the cover of trees and started across. With the snow deep in places, she slowed to a walk, cursing the dampness that seeped through her socks. She trudged, head bowed, till she came to a spot where the snow was churned as though children or a dog had been digging. At a glimpse of what lay beneath, she stopped. Ice. Not the ice of a shallow puddle, but the crust atop a deep, dark void. A shiver went through her that had nothing to do with the cold. The field wasn't a field at all. She'd blundered onto a frozen pond. She looked behind her, and then ahead. She was already halfway across, and others had passed this way before her, by the look of it, only that morning. Her car was in sight, and if she turned and went back, it would take her a good half hour of walking in the freezing rain to reach it. She continued on. Her fears receded with every step. No ominous cracking sounds, no deep-throated rumble, not the slightest tremor in the soles of her shoes. The ice was solid, perfectly safe. Until the instant it shattered beneath her, opening a maw that swallowed her whole into water only 2 degrees above freezing. Lauren shot to the surface, gasping. Cold branded every inch of her flesh, slashed at her scalp, knifed her face. She floundered for the nearest edge. Sliding her gloved hands over the ice, she groped for a bump, the smallest notch. A surface smooth and seamless as glass offered nothing on which to take hold. She managed to haul her shoulders out, but the weight of waterlogged winter clothing dragged her back in. She clung to the edge. 2 to 5 minutes. The thought burst unbidden into her head. Where had she heard it? Was it true? 2 to 5 minutes. The time she had before hypothermia sapped her strength to the point she couldn't pull herself from the water. In sudden panic, she threw out her arms, kicked with her legs. If she couldn't pull herself out, she'd swim out. But already the cold was taking its toll, making her movement stiff and ungainly. She rose for an instant, then slid back again. Stay calm. Don't panic. Surely a fit 28-year-old was at the upper end of that 5-minute range. Help! Help me! Somebody! Please! No answer. Not even a barking dog. Somehow her legs had drifted ahead of her under the ice. She fought to lever them back behind her. The ledge she clung to broke free in her hands. She scrambled for purchase, gained it by nothing but the tips of her fingers rapidly losing sensation. The drag on her legs kept pulling her under. Realization struck like a blow. Not a pond, but a stream. This water was moving. If she lost her grip. Help! Somebody! Anybody! Help! Movement flickered at the corner of her eye. An elderly man was lumbering toward her from one of the yards. Oh, thank God. Another chunk of ice broke away. She clawed her way back, the weight of her arms now all that was keeping her from going under. The man was still 10 paces away, moving so slowly. What was he doing? What was wrong with him? Couldn't he see? Her hopes dissolved. He walked with a limp, his left arm bent and clamped to his side. How could he pull her out with one arm? How could he pull her out at all when the ice kept... Stop, she wheezed. Go back. Get help. The man kept coming. At the edge of the stream, he picked up a branch and pushed it ahead of him onto the ice. Sliding his feet on the treacherous surface, he started toward her. No, stop. It isn't safe. Her words emerged in breathless gasps. He'd never hear them. He continued his slow, relentless approach. 5 yards from shore, and the ice was still holding. She could see his eyes now, faded with age, yet wide with concern, almost as frightened as she felt herself. The branch inched toward her, 2 yards away, 1 yard away, less than a foot. The ice shuddered against her neck. No! She screamed, panic giving her the volume she needed. It's cracking! Don't come any closer! He shuffled to a halt, the salvation of the branch just out of her reach. Leaning forward, he stretched out his arm. The branch skittered the last few inches. If not for seeing the wood jab her hands, she'd never have known. Her flesh was stone. She tried first one, then the other, but neither would move. Too late? Was her 5 minutes up already? No, her gloves had frozen to the ice. She pulled out her hands. Fingers fixed into useless claws, she hooked them over a joint in the branch. The man started backing away, his weight enough to anchor each step as he hydroplaned her onto the surface. Face down, her nose fairly scraping the ice, Lauren watched it slide beneath her, fearing that at any moment those frigid jaws would open again and snatch her back. Movement stopped. She turned her head. There, he stood at the fringe of vision, her unlikely hero. Why had he stopped? What was filling his gaze with such panic? Something he could hear that she couldn't? Something he could feel? Oh no, please. The jaws cracked wide and he was gone. No! She flailed at the ice, her frenzied strokes propelling her forward. Gliding her on her belly, spreading her weight, she aimed for the downstream side of the hole. She scraped off the snow and peered through the ice. A hand clawed the underside of its surface. Oh, God, help! Help me, please, somebody! Help! She lurched to her feet, stood splay-legged over the spot. She kicked with her heel again and again, but the surface was now defiantly solid. The hand vanished, replaced by a head. Strands of gray hair softly waving drifted serenely along with the current. She staggered after him, screaming her loudest. Screaming. Screaming. The ghostly tendrils slowly submerged, vanishing into the frozen depths. She dropped to her knees, brought her nose to the surface once more, and shrieked when he reappeared below her. His eyes huge, bulging with fear, their faces only inches apart. Lauren pounded the ice with her fists, blood from her knuckles spraying the endless carpet of white. She forced more screams from her ravaged throat, watched as his movements gradually slowed. Dazed, helpless, she peered in his eyes and beheld the moment, the very instant life ceased to shine in his gaze. Chapter 2. A crowd had gathered. Seated at the table, Lauren stared blankly out the kitchen window at the row of people lining the stream. They'd been kept from venturing onto the ice by the police tape now strung between trees. Where were they all a half hour ago when she'd been screaming to rupture her throat? Nothing attracted spectators faster than the sight of police and emergency vehicles. A uniformed worker, A fireman, she thought, tethered by a safety rope at his waist, knelt on the ice, cutting a hole in the frozen surface. Shavings flew from the whirling blade, its chainsaw-like buzz filling the air. Somehow the noise seemed an affront, like shouting at a funeral, laughing at an open grave. The paramedic stepped in front of her again, blocking the scene. He took the empty mug from her hands and replaced it with another, only half full. Just as well. Any more and she'd spill it the way she was shaking. The officer just wants another quick word with you, then we'll get you off to the hospital. Lauren stared down into the coffee and pulled the blanket closer around her. I know it's uncomfortable, but your shivering's actually a good sign. It means your temperature didn't get too low. He slid his fingers inside her wrist and consulted his watch. Hypothermia doesn't get serious till your core temp drops below 95. I'd say you were just on the edge. Any worse, and you'd be showing signs of confusion, lethargy, trouble breathing. The heat and fluids should be enough, but we'll get you checked out just to be sure. She knew what he was doing, chatting to distract her, keep her engaged, and not for any medical reasons. He parted the collar of her shirt she was wearing and pressed a stethoscope to her skin. I gather these clothes aren't yours since they're dry. Did she give them to you? He jerked his head toward the stocky figure standing in the yard, her back to the window. Lauren frowned. She vaguely remembered staggering to the nearest house and pounding on its door. The woman who answered, not much older than Lauren herself, had given her clothes, called 911, then sat her here at the kitchen table and started pouring hot coffee into her. Only after the ambulance arrived had the woman gone outside to talk with the police. The medic lifted one of her hands and flexed her swollen, bloodied fingers. Lauren winced, but she didn't pull away. You sure did a number on yourselves, didn't you? His voice was soft. Your hands were probably numb by that stage. Lucky you didn't break a finger. Lucky. Right. More lucky than some. The silence stretched. Look, I heard what you told the cop before. By the sounds of it, there really wasn't anything. He cut off when she met his gaze, leaving his attempt to console her unfinished. Sensing she was still too shocked to process, or unable to override his own doubts. She drained the cup and handed it back to him. He got up, gave her shoulder a squeeze, and stepped to the counter to get her another. She was left with a view of the crowd once more. Most were talking in quiet groups. Strangers lured by the prospect of drama, sharing what few facts they had, speculating on what might have happened. The buzz of the saw abruptly cut off. The woman in the yard took a step forward. All heads turned toward the uniformed worker. Wielding a gaff, he hooked the slab of ice he had freed and pulled it out. Lauren braced as he reached into the water. A sound like a wounded animal escaped her on catching a glimpse of the hand that emerged, white and stiff as the ice around it. She jumped when she felt someone looming over her. I'd just like to go through this one more time. Oblivious to the effect he'd had, the officer commenced reading her statement. She kept her gaze fixed straight ahead, nodding confirmation whenever he paused. Bad enough she'd had to speak the words initially. Hearing them recited back at her felt like he was passing judgment. Thank you, Miss Donnelly. That's all for now. He closed his notebook and looked aside. What hospital are you taking her to? The medic's reply was a toneless drone. Down at the stream, the police were hastily erecting a screen to block spectator view of proceedings, not fast enough to prevent her from seeing the body being slid from the hole in the ice. We'll be in touch if we need anything else, the officer finished. She took his arm as he turned to go. What was his name? Startled by the contact, perhaps finally noting by the tremor in her voice the state she was in, he followed her gaze. Miss Donnelly, perhaps, please, she said. He exchanged a look with the medic, then regarded her again, not unkindly. Roger Phelps. She released his arm. Thank you. At least now she would know who to mourn.